The Department of Homeland Security's refusal to release the records of Prince Harry.
There is a moment in every carefully constructed story when the architecture begins to show its cracks. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, incrementally, in ways that trained observers notice long before the general public does. And what we are witnessing right now in the spring of 2026 is precisely that moment in the story of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The cracks are no longer hairline fractures. They are load-bearing failures. And the man who saw them coming, who documented them, who warned about them with forensic precision while much of the mainstream media looked the other way, is Tom Bower, the biographer, the investigative author, the man who spent years following threads that nobody else had the courage or the patience to follow. Bower's book on the Sussex saga did not just tell a story. It opened a door. And in the months and years since its publication, the people walking through that door have included not just royal commentators and independent researchers, but financial analysts, immigration lawyers, tax specialists, and now, increasingly, institutions with the legal authority to do something about what they find. The IRS, U.S. immigration authorities, child services investigators. These are not tabloid inventions. These are the logical endpoints of questions that Tom Bower has been asking publicly for years, questions that are now being asked by people with subpoena power and institutional authority. So let us go through this carefully. Let us look at exactly what Tom Bower has put on the record, what serious researchers have been documenting, and what is now surfacing in ways that can no longer be managed by a press team operating out of a Montecito mansion. Because this story is not about gossip. It is not about whether you like Meghan Markle or sympathize with Prince Harry. It is about something more fundamental than personal opinion. It is about the gap between a constructed narrative and verifiable reality. And in 2026, that gap has become impossible to ignore. Let us begin where Tom Bower always begins, with the money. Because money, as any serious investigative journalist will tell you, is where the truth lives. Follow the money, and you find the story. And the financial story of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex is, at this point, one of the most dramatic collapses of a self-constructed commercial empire in recent memory. When Harry and Meghan departed from their senior royal roles in early 2020, the narrative they presented to the world was one of independence, self-sufficiency, a couple bold enough to step away from institutional support and build something of their own on the strength of their own talent, their own vision, their own appeal. It was a compelling story, and for a brief period, the commercial world appeared to believe it. The Netflix deal, the Spotify deal, the speaking engagements, the brand partnerships, the lifestyle venture. On paper, the Sussex commercial portfolio looked like the foundation of something substantial. Tom Bower looked at that foundation and saw something different. He saw a structure built on the rental value of a royal title rather than on any underlying talent or commercial proposition. And he said so clearly and repeatedly at a time when saying so was professionally inconvenient and legally risky. His assessment of Meghan's commercial proposition was direct. She had nothing to offer other than the proximity to royalty that she had acquired through marriage and was now attempting to monetize. That was not a personal attack. It was a commercial analysis, and it has been proven correct by the market itself. The Netflix relationship, which was supposed to be the cornerstone of the Sussex media empire, has effectively wound down. The documentary that generated significant attention in its first week produced no lasting commercial momentum. The series pitches the grand vision of a California-based media operation that would rival established production companies came to nothing. Netflix did not renew in the way that would have validated the Sussex brand. The market spoke. Tom Bower had already written the verdict before the market delivered it. Spotify was arguably even more instructive. A reported deal worth tens of millions of dollars. 13 podcast episodes. And then silence, followed by the streaming platform's quiet decision not to continue the relationship. When a company of Spotify's scale and commercial sophistication walks away from a deal of that reported size after a single season of output, it is communicating something precise and devastating about its assessment of the product it received. It is saying that the commercial return did not justify the investment. It is saying that the audience was not there in the numbers that would have been required. It is saying, in the language of the market, that the proposition did not deliver. And then there is the lifestyle brand. American Riviera Orchard, launched with a kind of carefully staged elegance that is designed to communicate effortless sophistication. Celebrity gifting, selective media placements, a visual language borrowed from the most aspirational corners of the lifestyle space. And then, in commercial terms, very little. The products that were supposed to fly off shelves, the jams and preserves that were going to position Meghan as the next great American lifestyle entrepreneur, struggled to generate the retail momentum that the launch fanfare had implied was inevitable. Tom Bauer had been warning about this for years. His assessment, delivered when the Sussex commercial operation was still generating optimistic headlines, was that they were burning through their resources at a rate that their income could not sustain. He put a floor figure on their annual lifestyle costs. £3 million per year minimum after tax. That is the cost of the Montecito estate, the security detail, the household staff, the travel, the wardrobe, the legal teams, and the public relations professionals required to manage a narrative that keeps threatening to unravel. And that is the floor, not the ceiling. Now look at what is coming in against that expenditure. The Netflix income from the initial deal has been realized. The Spotify money has been paid out against a relationship that no longer exists. The speaking fees that once commanded premium rates are declining in value as approval ratings decline. Brand partnerships require the kind of public goodwill that approval rating figures simply do not support. And the lifestyle brand has not delivered the commercial returns that would have been needed to justify its continued investment. This is the financial picture that is attracting the attention of people who understand American tax law. Because in the United States, when there is a visible and sustained gap between reported income and visible lifestyle expenditure, when that gap persists across multiple consecutive tax years, when it involves individuals living in a multi-million-dollar property and traveling in a style that befits that address, the Internal Revenue Service notices. And when the IRS notices, it has the investigative tools, the legal authority, and the institutional mandate to find out why the numbers do not add up. The calls for an IRS examination of Sussex finances are not coming from anonymous corners of the internet. They are coming from people with backgrounds in American tax law who are looking at publicly available information about the Sussex lifestyle and comparing it to publicly available information about the Sussex commercial ventures and asking a straightforward professional question. How is this being funded? Where is the money coming from? And is whatever is funding this lifestyle being properly disclosed and taxed in accordance with U.S. law? Those are not hostile questions. They are the questions that any competent tax authority asks when the numbers it can see do not reconcile with the lifestyle it can observe. And the fact that they are being asked more loudly and by more credentialed voices in 2026 than at any previous point is itself significant. There is a provision in United States immigration law that is not complicated or ambiguous. The admission of past drug use, specifically the use of controlled substances, is grounds for visa complications and potentially for denial or revocation of residency status. This is one of the most consistently enforced provisions in the American immigration framework. It is applied to ordinary applicants from every country in the world with considerable thoroughness, and in many cases without the exercise of discretion that might soften its impact. People who disclose relatively minor and distant drug-related incidents on immigration paperwork find themselves facing serious consequences. The system does not, as a matter of routine practice, make exceptions. Prince Harry, in his memoir published in January 2023, admitted in his own words, recorded in his own voice for the audiobook edition, to the use of cocaine, cannabis, and psilocybin mushrooms. These are not admissions buried in ambiguous language or capable of being interpreted charitably. They are explicit, detailed, and unambiguous. Harry did not write about experimental contact with substances decades in the past. He wrote with a level of candor that in almost any other immigration context would create immediate and serious complications. Tom Bauer's response to this dimension of the Harry and Meghan story was characteristically precise. He noted that the memoir's drug admissions reflected what he described as a complete absence of self-awareness. A person who genuinely understood the legal and institutional environment in which they were operating would not have made those admissions in that way, in that public a forum, with that level of detail, distributed on that global scale. The fact that Harry did make those admissions in those terms reflects either a genuine failure to understand their implications or a belief, apparently well-founded up to a certain point, that the normal rules of American immigration law would simply not be applied to him. The Heritage Foundation's Freedom of Information Act request for Harry's visa and immigration documents was initially resisted. The Department of Homeland Security did not produce the records that a FOIA request of that nature would typically require to be disclosed. That resistance is itself a piece of information. When an institution declines to be transparent about the application of its own rules to a specific individual, the reasonable inference is that the application of those rules, in that case, would be uncomfortable to examine publicly. What Tom Bauer has consistently argued is that Harry and Meghan operated, and to a significant extent continue to operate, from a foundational assumption that the rules applicable to ordinary people do not apply to them. For years, in the specific context of American immigration, that assumption appeared to be justified in practice. Harry continued to reside in California. No official explanation of how his drug admissions were reconciled with standard immigration requirements was ever provided. No public accounting of whether preferential treatment was extended and by whom was ever demanded by the mainstream media with sufficient persistence to produce an answer. But the political environment of 2026 is not the political environment of 2023. The current administration has made the consistent application of immigration law a central institutional priority. The idea that a foreign national who publicly admitted to controlled substance use continues to reside in the United States in conditions that would never be extended to an ordinary immigrant from any other country has become precisely the kind of story that the current political moment is designed to surface and address. The question is no longer whether Harry's immigration status will be formally scrutinized. The question is when and what that scrutiny will reveal about whether the law was applied consistently or whether special consideration was extended that would not survive public examination. If Harry's residency is ever formally investigated and found to have been maintained on the basis of preferential treatment that cannot be legally justified, the practical consequences for the Sussex, California life are total. The Montecito address, the California residency, the access to American media markets and American institutions. All of it depends on Harry being legally entitled to remain in the United States. And that entitlement has been resting quietly and without examination on foundations that serious legal analysts are now looking at very carefully. This section requires care. Questions involving children are sensitive by definition, and responsible journalism demands that they be handled with appropriate precision and appropriate humility about what is known versus what is alleged. But Tom Bauer and the researchers whose work has been building in this space are not engaged in irresponsible speculation. They are asking questions that arise from genuine and documented anomalies in the public record, anomalies that have never been satisfactorily explained by the people who would be best positioned to explain them. The timeline and documentation questions surrounding the births of Archie and Lilibet have circulated among serious researchers for several years. These are not questions invented by hostile commentators. They arise from specific departures from the precedents and practices that have historically governed how births in the British royal family are documented, announced, and made publicly verifiable. The departures in the Sussex case were significant enough and sustained enough to generate questions that have never been resolved through the kind of transparent disclosure that would have closed them down. There are also questions raised by researchers who have done extensive documented work in this space about the ages of the children relative to the official timeline of the Sussex relationship and marriage. These are not accusations. They are observations about timelines that, under mathematical scrutiny, require examination. And in 2026, the examination is ongoing. Layered over these questions is the separate but related matter of Meghan Markle's own age, which has been the subject of persistent and increasingly specific claims from people who knew her at various points in her life before her relationship with Harry became public. Her half-sister Samantha Markle has made direct statements on the record about family timelines that, if accurate, would place Meghan's birth year at a point significantly earlier than the official biographical record states. The individuals who knew Meghan during her school years in Los Angeles have been cited by researchers as potential sources of corroboration for a timeline that diverges from the official version. Why would Meghan's age matter? On its own, it might seem like a biographical footnote of limited significance. But age is not an isolated data point. It connects to career timelines, to the Mediterranean period that preceded her Hollywood career, to the timeline of how she came to be in the position she was in when she was introduced to Prince Harry. If the official age is incorrect by a significant margin, then the story of how and when and in what context Meghan built the connections and the access that ultimately led her to Soho House in 2016 looks considerably different. And it is those connections, that access, and the circumstances of that meeting that sit at the heart of the most significant unresolved questions in this entire story. Tom Bower has been meticulous in his published work and in his public commentary about the ambition that has defined Meghan Markle throughout her adult life. He has described it as enormous, genuine, and consistent from childhood. He has also been clear that, in his assessment, that ambition has consistently exceeded the talent and the conventional achievement that would normally be required to support it. And the gap between what Meghan's ambition demanded and what her conventional career trajectory could have provided is where the questions about her pre-Harry years become most significant. Before Meghan Markle was a recognizable name to anyone outside the specific audience for a cable legal drama, there was a period in her adult life that is now attracting sustained and serious investigative attention. The years before Hollywood. The years spent building connections that are not fully accounted for in any official biography. The years that researchers working in this space have come to refer to, with increasing specificity, as the Mediterranean period. The private yacht circuit that has long served as an access point for ambitious individuals seeking proximity to wealth and power in European waters is not a secret. It is a documented feature of a specific social world, one that intersects with finance, with politics, with entertainment, and with the kind of connections that can accelerate a career in ways that conventional networking cannot replicate. Tom Bower has not shied away from discussing what access to that world looks like and what it tends to require. What serious researchers and increasingly mainstream media figures are now asking openly is whether Meghan Markle's access to that world, during the years before her relationship with Harry brought her to global attention, was more extensive than any official account has acknowledged. The question being posed, and posed now, by recognizable figures with credentialed positions in the media landscape rather than only by anonymous researchers, is not whether she had any connection to that world. It is a question about the scale and the nature of that connection, and that shift from whether to how much is a significant one. It reflects a threshold having been crossed in the evidence available to serious researchers, a point at which the underlying fact is treated as sufficiently established that the question moves to magnitude rather than existence. The photographs that researchers describe as placing Meghan in specific contexts with specific individuals during this period have not been publicly published in the mainstream media. But the people who have examined them and who have professional credibility have been specific enough about what they depict to indicate that the questions they raise are not trivial ones. And the documented removal of significant quantities of Meghan's pre-Harry digital footprint, material that was available online before her relationship with the prince became public knowledge and has since been systematically removed, raises its own questions about what that footprint contained and why its disappearance was considered necessary or desirable. The official story of how Harry and Meghan came to meet, a chance introduction through a mutual friend at a members' club in London, has the quality of mythology that is always slightly too perfect to be entirely satisfactory. Tom Bower has spent considerable time examining the specific circumstances of that meeting and the specific individuals who facilitated it. And what his research has led him to is a question about whether the encounter was as accidental as the official narrative requires it to have been. The name that keeps appearing in serious examinations of this question is Marcus Anderson, a well-connected figure in the social world in which both Harry and Meghan were operating in 2016. Anderson's sustained presence in the Sussex orbit is something that Tom Bower has specifically noted. Meghan Markle has a documented and thoroughly established pattern of ending relationships, personal and professional, with considerable speed and finality when those relationships are no longer serving her purposes. The list of individuals who were once close to her and are now estranged, publicly criticized, or simply excised from her life is long and specific. Against that pattern, Anderson's continued presence is an anomaly that deserves examination. In any serious investigative context, the person who survives the purge is the most interesting person in the room. They survive because their continued presence serves a purpose that outweighs the cost of maintaining the relationship. What purpose Marcus Anderson serves for the Sussexes, and what he knows about the circumstances of the Soho House meeting and the period leading up to it, are questions that investigators with the appropriate authority and the appropriate tools are better positioned to pursue than any journalist working from publicly available information alone. What Tom Bower has established, through documented research rather than speculation, is that the official narrative of the Sussex relationship rests on a foundation that has never been independently verified and that contains elements that serious examination has consistently found difficult to reconcile with the evidence available from other sources. The YouGov polling data that emerged in early 2026, published in connection with what would have been the late Queen Elizabeth centenary, is not just a set of popularity figures. It is a verdict. And the verdict it delivers on Harry and Meghan is comprehensive and, for anyone who has been following Tom Bower's analysis, entirely predictable. The late Queen Elizabeth at 81% positive. Princess Diana at 77%. The Prince and Princess of Wales in the mid-70s. Princess and at 70%. King Charles, navigating a reign that has involved enormous personal and institutional complexity, at 60%. Even Prince Edward registers at 53%. And at the bottom of the ranking, just above the catastrophically diminished figure of Prince Andrew, Harry at 30% and Meghan at 20%. 20%. 8 out of every 10 people in the United Kingdom view Meghan Markle negatively. This is not a public relations problem. It is not a challenge to be addressed with better media strategy or more sympathetic interview placement. It is a fundamental and apparently stable public judgment about a public figure, delivered by a public that has had years of information on which to base that judgment. And it carries consequences that are not symbolic. They are commercially determinative. No mainstream brand with a serious interest in its consumer relationships wants to be associated with a figure that 8 out of 10 of its potential customers view negatively. No media organization with a significant audience wants to give extended positive coverage to someone whose approval numbers are in the bottom quarter of any recognizable public figure. The commercial ecosystem